I joined the military at 18, then became a cop. The very first night of shift, within the first 30 minutes, we got a call of a baby not breathing. I was with my supervisor at the time when the call came in, and he put his foot down and didn't let up until we made it to the address. As soon as I ran into the residence, the mom was screaming hysterically and holding the baby, yelling, "Please save him," over and over. I was fresh out of boot camp and tech school and freshly spun up on CPR. I grabbed the baby and started CPR, knowing the whole time I performed it, there was no way I was going to bring this child back from the beyond. I could tell he had been gone for quite some time, and even if I did bring him back, it wouldn't matter because the brain had been without oxygen for too long. I kept performing CPR until the paramedics arrived. When the paramedics ran in about 10 minutes later, they gave me the "he's gone" look, but they knew why I was trying. The poor mother and father were a mess on the floor, praying for a miracle behind me. The paramedics took over, taking the baby with them to the waiting ambulance with the parents in tow. After the ambulance departed the scene with the baby and the parents, I remember standing on the front lawn with my supervisor and staring at the night sky, smoking a cigarette, wondering just how the fuck I was going to get through the rest of the night without bawling in front of everyone. Somehow I remained stoic the rest of the night, but killed 2 packs of cigarettes. Not much else was said that night, except during our report, and even then little needed to be said. We found out later the baby had died from SIDS, and there wasn't anything I could have done to save him, or anyone else for that matter. This did comfort me a bit, but it was still horrible to experience, especially at the age of 18. This was roughly 12 years ago. I have 2 kids of my own, 5 years old and 2 years old, and now I worry about them constantly. During the entire SIDS stage, where they were susceptible to it, I would wake up in a panic and sprint to their rooms to make sure they were still breathing. Fuck SIDS. I was on my way to dinner when my pager goes off for a cardiac arrest right down the street. Reported drowning in a hotel. I get there right after the cops and immediately sprint through the hotel to get to the back. First thing I see is a frantic woman, a mother, screaming incoherently. The child was already out of the pool, and the cop had already started CPR with his partner. I cleared the area of everyone, which meant slowly clearing out a dozen screaming and crying people, while they hit me and yelled in my face, just to do something so they didn't feel quite so helpless. We got a pulse back in the ambulance after drugs were pushed, but sadly, he died 3 days later, having never woken up. Monitor your kids. He had an asthma attack while swimming, and since no one was watching, he drowned. A 17-year-old pedestrian was hit by a car. There were 2 feet and mostly arm just laying in the street as I drove up. First time I ever saw intestines in real life. The guy was still conscious. He told me his name. I still remember it many years later. I'd seen dead people before, but this was the first time I ever experienced someone going from alive to dead directly in front of me. My dad has been on the job for 25 plus years and has had some crazy stories, but one of his friends had the absolute worst crime scene story I have ever heard. So back in the 90s, he used to work in a pretty shitty area in New York City. He routinely had some really messed up experiences, but the worst scene he ever came across was a noise complaint in a more residential area, as opposed to the projects where most of the calls took place. Neighbors called about this guy making all kinds of noises in his garage after hearing some screaming from the house earlier on. When they arrived and went to the door, no one answered, but then they opened the garage door and there was the guy, standing in his garage, covered almost head to toe in blood, with blood all over the floor. He was screaming something about they all had to die. They approached him, guns drawn, and he dropped whatever he had in his hands, and they cuffed him. There were several garbage cans in the garage, and they both almost threw up when they opened them to find the guy's wife and 2 kids chopped into pieces and thrown in the trash, just filled to the top with the bloody, chopped up limbs, torsos, and heads. I can't imagine responding to a noise complaint, expecting to tell a rowdy or intoxicated residents to keep it down, only to find a garbage of garbage cans full of bloody parts. The guy kept going on and on about how his family was being controlled by the devil and they needed to die. That's the part I remember the most. Of all the crazy stories I've heard from cops, this is by far the worst and most horrifying. I was working a nice Sunday night last summer, and we hadn't had a car or motorcycle wreck all day, so we were waiting for it. It's almost a safe bet on nice Sundays like this to have at least one wreck in our rural response area. We were sitting at the dinner table, shooting the bull about a local substance seekers when the tone dropped for a car wreck. We were heading that way when police hit us on the radio and told us it was a car versus deer. I've never hit a deer, but I've seen plenty of wrecks, so I'm thinking it would be a straightforward run. Police chimed back in that they were pretty sure that the guy was DOA, dead on arrival. We rolled up on scene, and lo and behold, this dude was messed up. Blood everywhere. Picture this. The deer, a large antlered buck, went through the windshield, antlers first, driver's side, thrashing around and flying the sky around for a few seconds. Deer had cut itself badly going in and bled out, but not before ripping the guy's chest open and making him unrecognizable by all standards. Probably the most blood in a wreck I've ever seen. My jurisdiction has a lot of illegal substances of all kinds, but speed and smack are the most prevalent. Unfortunately, also a lot of teenage pregnancies as well. Combine those two, and you get inexperienced, abusive mothers who make mistakes. It was a rainy Thursday evening, and we got a call for a car wreck with entrapment. We get on scene. The fire and police are frantically searching the area. I send my partner over to check out the patients and start the assessment. No sooner than I point, I see what the issue is. The mother hadn't properly secured the child, and due to the rain, I assume was going way too fast when she wrecked. The child went through the windshield. He was decapitated due to the force of hitting the glass. His bloody body was mangled in the dashboard, and his head nowhere to be found. The mother did not know this and was freaking out. Officers were distracting her and trying to get her help while we searched for the child's head. I ended up fighting it, quite bruised and disfigured. I wrapped it in a towel to hide it from prying eyes. The firemen got into the car to secure the body. That was the toughest and most messed up thing I've ever done. Having to tell and show the mother, messed up out of her mind, that her kid was killed like that. It was the second time I've ever held a decapitated head in my hands. I had about a year and a half before I left for the Air Force, so I decided to become a certified EMT. About 4 months later, we responded to a traffic accident on the interstate. Big deal. These are common calls. When we arrive at the scene, all you see is an 18-wheeler with an Oldsmobile Sierra lodged underneath it. Apparently, the 18-wheeler jackknifed while a family of 3, including the family dog, and the Oldsmobile, slammed right under it. The male driver's head was snapped backwards, while the wife in the right passenger seat was grotesquely twisted to the right. The child in the car seat suffered minor injuries by the glass, but nothing serious. She survived just fine and was taken in by their aunt. The little family dog also survived and was found on the floorboard of the back seat, shivering and hiding. After some consultation and a short break, I resigned 2 weeks later. I work has an AEMT equivalence in Germany. One time, an old woman called us because her foot was bleeding. Nothing unusual so far, so we drove without any expectations of what was waiting for us. We arrived, rang the doorbell, and the daughter of the old woman opened the door. The first thing we noticed was the incredibly awful smell of decay or something rotten. The daughter showed us the way to her mom, and the more we came near her, the worse the smell became. From the inside, the house looked messy as a contrary to the first sight of the house from the outside. We approached the old woman, and she was wearing dirty, yellow, brownish stained clothes and had greasy hair. But we still wondered where this awful smell was coming from. I, until this point, had coughed multiple times already, because the smell was getting more and more intense. We asked the woman what happened. She told us that she hurt her foot and now it was bleeding. What she described as blood was a dirty, 1-month-old, we asked her how long she was wearing it, sock soaked in a brown-red mix of blood, pus, and old ichor. My partner tried to remove the sock to see how bad the infection had become, and as he pulled the sock off, only to her ankle, a handful of maggots fell out of the sock onto the ground. A flash of the worst smell in my entire life nearly made me puke. My partner resigned quickly, removing the sock even further and put 2 bandages around the sock, and we drove her straight to the emergency room. Waiting there was a pain too, because the smell was incredibly horrible. After we handed her over, we asked ourselves how she didn't have septic symptoms already, or at least fever. To this day, I'll remember the quote of the mother as we asked her why she didn't change the sock or go to the doctor earlier, and she said, "Last Friday it itched a bit, but I'm not feeling anything anymore." I remember doing ride-alongs with an EMS crew for exposure hours in my nursing school. I was sitting in the truck on a call when they wheeled in an elderly woman. She complained of weakness and shortness of breath, fairly common and usually not emergency symptoms for old folks, so they just wheeled her in at a leisurely pace to bring her to the hospital. Her vitals were acceptable and she didn't have labored breathing. So we pull out of her neighborhood and are about 15 minutes from the hospital when she goes unresponsive and stops breathing. Lights and sirens bagging her and AKG looked fine. That's odd. So the medic goes to intubate, and no sooner does he take the oxygen mask off of her and leans over her, that she retches, full force, a Vesuvian eruption of bright red blood, right square into the medic's face. He was covered in vomity blood from head to toe. The entire truck looked like a nightmare on Elm Street. But the fun wasn't over yet. No sooner did she empty her entire blood supply into the guy's glasses that she goes into PEA. The heart is sending an electrical impulse, but the muscle is saying no. So now we are pushing on her chest, still haven't intubated, and each push is gushing a little more blood into the bag mask. She also lost bowel and bladder control. The garnish on this ridiculous mess. We continued the resuscitation for 10 minutes on the way to the hospital. Equipment getting contaminated as we touched it, each other, and still gushed with the CPR compressions. There wasn't an inch of us, the patient, the truck, or the stretcher, that didn't get coated in blood. Shoes, socks, even soaked through my scrub pants to my underwear and my skin. I was less than a year into nursing school, 18 years old, and I had old lady vomit blood on my crotch. I willingly signed up for this profession, and even decided to go into DEP for the educational opportunity. She never made it to the hospital, but the horror on the faces of the ER team as they looked inside the truck told me that this doesn't normally happen. Stayed in nursing school. I've been a nurse 15 years. My dad was sent to Oklahoma to speak at a conference. While he was there, the company he worked for had him work a few shifts. One afternoon, they received a call about a stench that was coming from an apartment unit. Upon arrival, they knocked on the door. No answer. Once they were able to get inside, they found a deceased man in his mid-60s, sitting in a lazy-boy, wearing only boxer shorts surrounded by years of filth. When they went to move the fellow, cockroaches fell out of his underwear, and not just a few. The cockroaches from his apartment found a new home in his shorts. My father said it took everything inside him not to puke. Hey guys, Gotay here. Wanted to thank you so much for watching this rather disturbing video. And please have respect in the comments section for these individuals. A lot of these experiences are very traumatic. I'm actually training to be a law enforcement officer myself at this moment, and I know I'll have plenty of interesting experiences. So stay tuned in the next few years for when I share those on this channel, if I'm still around by then. Hopefully so. I really hope so. So thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you mates in the next episode.